Hello and welcome to episode number 42 of the Virtual Velo Podcast with me, Emma Martin, and my co-host, Chris Schwenker. So thank you very much to Cy Bradley for that fantastic introduction and handover in episode 41. Chris, it's been a couple of weeks. What have you been up to?
I haven't been up to anything, but Cy who? I don't remember a Cy.
Oh, I can't believe you've forgotten him already.
No, absolutely not. Cy is he'll always have a place at the Virtual Velo Podcast. But no, what I've been doing hasn't been nearly as exciting as you. And like I always say, there is the thing about virtual cycling that is really cool, and it's when people that meet virtually actually meet in real life. Again, I've had a couple meetups with some of the the dirt friends I belong to, the Dads Inside Riding Trainers team, and we've met together a couple of times. I know that you're in the midst of a meetup yourself.
Yeah, we are. So the Women's Only Wednesday Chain Gang, which runs from September through to the end of March on Zwift, we are having an in real life meetup at the moment in France. So a plane full of riders arrived at Limoges Airport on Wednesday morning, very, very early. And we are on day 2. So we have a whole group of women out here in France, staying in various locations, but all riding together in real life from the ages of 24 to 58. Most of them have never met in real life or person to person. And I tell you something, I have never heard so much chatter out on a bike ride. And we did just shy of 60k today out in the French sunshine. And it was absolutely fantastic. Like I say, the only thing everybody has in common, A, is love of bikes, and B, is the fact that they rode the Women's Only Wednesday Chain Gang over the winter on Zwift.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. Like, cycling is a very social sport to begin with. And people that don't know about virtual cycling or cycling esports don't realize how it's easier to be social when you're riding indoors. You don't have to worry about the elements or anything that's around you. And there are so many ways to interact that you don't have on the road. Getting to see people in real life, it's almost as if you've known them and you've known them for years. And it's a cool thing. It really is a cool thing.
It is one of those things that people just automatically interact as though they have known each other forever.
Yeah, and speaking of our guest today was on the podcast, a friend of the podcast. He's been on twice, and I was looking back, and the last time was almost a year ago now. Tremendous amount of things have happened in that year.
Oh, yeah, I imagine they have. And let's introduce, shall we, our guest today. Our guest today is George Gilbert. Dr. George Gilbert, should I give you your proper title, George? You have indeed been on the Virtual Velo Podcast twice now. I'm going to hold my hand up really early, George, and admit the fact that whilst I have downloaded and had a look around of indieVelo, I have not actually ridden on the platform. But I imagine there are quite a lot of listeners out there like me who have had a bit of a look, dabbled a bit to see what it's all about. I'm going to start with a very straightforward question. What are indieVelo's sort of USPs, selling points currently at the moment that you would say to entice someone like myself to jump on the platform and really have a go?
But first of all, thank you. And thank you, Professor Emma Martin.
No.
if we're being formal here, let's go for it. In terms of indieVelo, it all comes back to imagine if online cycling was an Olympic sport, and what would that really look like? indieVelo is about creating a product for committed athletes, people who train with purpose. That purpose might be for online racing, it might be for real life racing, it might be for something else. But it's for people who care about accuracy, about precision, people who care about their numbers. It's about tactically interesting racing, about fairness and credibility, performance verification, knowing that what you're seeing is genuine athletic performance. And there are hundreds of small unique features that go into that, whether that's physics or anything else. But it's that kind of emotional position that really matters. It's the prioritization of quality over quantity, and that in a nutshell is what makes indieVelo unique and why it's attracted so much attention across the entire industry.
And it is attracting attention, isn't it? And it's really interesting that that very much that specific vision, because the second you say imagine online cycling was an Olympic sport, it really does put a vision in someone's head about what it could be and the aspects that you've been talking about there.
Yes, definitely. And it's that kind of shining a beacon into the distance of this is what it could be, this is what it should be, and then trying to build something that reflects those kind of common values that we all share and what we all would like to see and how much better it could be.
You've had some updates out really, really recently. Do you want to tell us about those?
Yes, of course. And the most recent one is the update to the in-game physics engine. And this comes back to what I was saying before about what really matters is interesting racing. If it's just a what fest, that's pretty one-dimensional. It's boring to watch and participate in. If sport is to succeed, it needs to have tactics. It needs to have decision-making. And just like real-life bike racing, the person with the biggest legs doesn't always win. In fact, they don't usually win. indieVelo has always had that kind of world-leading physics engine with wind and positioning and drafting and collisions and cornering and braking and racing lines and realistic speeds and all these kind of things that set it apart from everything else. But this latest update, it's brought in realistic bicycle physics, so momentum, inertia, gearing, and so on. And that means that the virtual bikes now respond to your actions indoors the same as a real bike does outdoors. And it basically feels like riding a bike rather than sitting on a spin machine in a gym. And that opens up all sorts of really interesting tactical decisions people have to make as they're riding along.
I have a couple of specific questions about that. And you really caused a stir, George, with the somewhat cryptic language that you used in the release notes from this week. Now, I'm just going to read what you wrote, and now I want to get your interpretation, and then we can react to that. But you wrote, to take just one example, whether to mash the pedals in a high gear or spin lightly at a high cadence, now automatically has exactly the same consequences indoors as outdoors, for better or for worse. Choose wisely. What do you mean?
So the bottom line is that you hear people online say that watts are watts and none of this, physics doesn't matter. But if you genuinely believe that, I'll tell you what, I'll offer a challenge up to any listeners who wants to take me on in a race. Say it's 200 meters up a local big hill. So not very far, but pretty steep. We'll equalize our weights. We'll have equal bikes. We'll both do a steady, exactly 200 watts. And if it's a draw, if watts are watts, you get to keep my bike. And if I win, I get to keep yours. Want to take me on?
I have a feeling that there are conditions involved in this. So let's set the ground rules, George.
Yeah, you're going to be on a 1956 steel bike, and George is going to be on a
equal bikes.
No, I know.
Equal bikes, but yes, channeling my inner Columbo. Just one more thing. You're going to ride in a 5410 gear, and I'm going to ride in a 3920. Everything's still equal. Still both of us doing exactly 200 watts, 200 meters up a steep hill. Still want to take me on? And just watts alone completely misses the point about how bikes actually work. As I said, tactically interesting racing where people have to make choices, like what gear to ride in, being able to change gears to re-accelerate coming out of corners. What gear are you going to be in to make an attack? Do you deliberately choose a really big gear for smoother power control when doing a time trial? Sitting in and mashing your pedals in a massive gear at 50 RPM or something is now just as effective indoors as it is outdoors, i.e. not very. This part is what makes bike racing really compelling to watch and participate in. And it's ultimately why it's so important for indieVelo and the industry to move on from this kind of first generation of products where watts really are watts, to physics engines where your choices over how you ride matter. And then that just makes a much more compelling product to watch and race.
So just to kind of break it down a little bit, is this a penalty for a rider who has adapted to use a low cadence, like you see with a lot of the elite riders? Like if you're riding along and, say the normal cadence for an average road racer is 80s per se, and an indoor racer has adapted to mash the pedals at a cadence of 50. Is that person now not going to be as efficient or as effective, or will their performance be affected because they happen to adapt to that low cadence?
So firstly, I wouldn't describe it as a penalty at all. It's just physics, in the same way that if you were to ride your bike outdoors and select a massive gear, that's not, Isaac Newton imposing a penalty on you. That's just not how it works. indieVelo is literally just a bunch of physics equations, and what pops out in exactly the same way as it does in real life. So there's nothing that actively penalizes you or anything like that. And in some circumstances, just as in real life, a big gear is the right choice. If you're doing an individual time trial and just want to keep it rolling at a smooth, steady speed on the flat, then that's the right choice to make. But the key point here is that it is a choice. You now have choices to make, and those choices will come with consequences, some good, some bad, depending on the situation. But again, it's not the case that there's some kind of set of conditions built in that if you're doing this cadence, then you get a penalty or anything like that. It's just physics doing its thing.
So is this, George, then really about tuning online cycling to be more like road cycling or road racing?
No, I genuinely believe that it's for it to succeed, it must be different. There's no point replicating the same thing. It's the same as if you watch the Olympics and the swimming, and they've got the 50-meter freestyle and then the 55-meter freestyle and then the 60-meter freestyle, and somebody comes along and wins 20 events. That's not particularly impressive, but not particularly compelling. For online cycling to be its own sport in its own right, it must be different in some way. And what we see is this kind of a blend of different styles. So the starts tend to be very aggressive, very much like a cyclocross race. The middles tends to be generally more steady, so more like a time trial. And then the end tends to be a sprint, and that's so more like road racing. So it's not any trying to duplicate real life racing. It's a different physiology that's required. But it comes back to what I was saying before. If it's just about watts, if it's just about power, then it's going to be equivalent to weightlifting or something, which is a fine and venerable Olympic sport. But it's not that compelling to go and watch. Whereas what's really cool about bike racing is that it's not the most powerful person who wins. It's the person who's the most tactically astute. And that is the important part.
Can you provide an example when this new physics dynamic would come into play? And what the racer or what the rider will actually feel at the pedals?
All the time. And as I say, it's not something that magically kicks in particular scenarios. It's just physics doing its thing all the time. The times when it will have the biggest effect, though, is essentially when you're accelerating. As I said before, when you're kind of trying to accelerate out of the corner, when you're trying to jump and attack, that sort of scenario. If you just as in real life, if you're in a massive gear, then you're not going to accelerate very quickly. Whereas if you're in the right gear, then you'll accelerate much faster.
So it's more of a matter of acceleration. Like there are many very high-profile elite athletes that are out of the saddle for long periods of time, and some real-world athletes that also transition that are out of the saddle that use a cadence that's in the 50 to 60 range and are very effective. Is this something that would be perhaps affected by the new physics engine, or since it's something that's not an acceleration where it's more of a steady state effort, would that still be affected by these changes that you've made?
try it out and see. As I say, it's not something where I deliberately tried to kind of penalize anything. It's just physics. It's inertia, it's momentum, it's rotating wheel mass. It's all these things that affect a real bike. And now they're also going to affect your virtual bike as well.
George, one of the other things that has come out recently is Apple TV. Lots of interest in Apple TV and opening up a much wider audience as well. Only available at the moment to the Founders Club. What are the thoughts around time frame in terms of that being available to more riders?
It's really exciting, actually. indieVelo is now available on every major platform, on Windows, on Mac, on Android, on Chrome OS, on iPad, iPhone, Apple TV. And it means that everyone now can get to experience what indoor bike riding should feel like, and all the stuff that we've talked about before. And in particular, it means that everyone can now help contribute to defining the future of indoor sport, because that's fundamentally what this is all about. It's about trying to work out what we would like to see in the future and building that kind of next generation of online physics engines, online bike racing engines, so that we get tactically interesting racing. We get to build a sport that's compelling, that it's good to watch, that's good to participate in. In terms of timeline, there isn't a set one yet. It's very much a case of let's try it out. When we first launched the Android version, it was very similar. That ran for a few months. That was very stable, and at the point where it was stable, then that became open to everyone. So I would imagine something very similar for the iOS versions and Apple TV versions as well.
In the forums and, over the past couple of months, the Apple TV was a major sticking point for people. It was a barrier. They wanted to get the Apple TV out there. And I guess it's kind of like a catch-22 thing where in order to test the technology, you have to put the technology out there and you have to give it to certain people so that they can try it before you put it out to the broader masses. Another sticking point is the graphics. Now, to me, I don't even see the graphics, right? If I'm racing, that's all I focus on is the avatars and the cues that I'm receiving, which there are great ones on indieVelo, right? There are ways that you can really tell the efforts that's being applied. But for a lot of people, the graphics are a big thing. I don't know. Do you look at the graphics, Emma? Did they make a difference to you when you're riding around the virtual world?
They make it a little bit more interesting than 10, 15 years ago, trying to just do a turbo session before work. But to be really honest, I'm a bit more like you, Chris. I tend to be either focused on the training session I'm delivering at the point of time, or I'm focused on the racing rather than what's going on in the world around the racing.
So I guess that's a question then, George. Is that something that's a priority for you now, or are you still focused on the building blocks and getting that in place?
Yeah, I think you both made the point for me. For now, very much the graphics are a placeholder. They're not intended to be the final version at all. But the intention has always been to focus on the core engine. What makes bike racing awesome is the feel, the decisions, the tactics, everything that we talked about before. That's incredibly hard to do, and why nobody else has done it before, and needs kind of complete focus. And the graphics can come later. That's relatively straightforward. As I said, indieVelo is attractive to the committed athletes, people who care about their performance first and what it looks like second, exactly as you've both said. And I share that exact same prioritization too.
There are a lot of people, I think, out there who probably would have said completely the opposite of what Chris and I have done, though.
Yes, that's fine. And there are millions of people out there who ride bikes, but you can't cater to all of them all the time. If you spread yourself too thin and try and please everybody all the time, then you'll end up being average and pleasing nobody. So my prioritization is the same as that kind of committed athlete group. It's about getting the feel, the tactics, the racing right first because that's the priority. And yeah, that's fine. If it doesn't appeal to everybody, I'm completely okay with that. But it matters an enormous amount to that small group of people who really care.
Well, those people that are really wanting there to be great graphics on indieVelo, be one of the only things that's holding them back. Everything else is, the development is, pretty amazing. There are some virtual cycling conspiracy theorists out there. Like, some of them think that you are not actually just one person doing all this, that there's an army of people back there. You can either confirm or deny that. The other rumor that you hear through the grapevine is that there might be some investment coming in that will help with the graphics and moving that along. Any truth to that, or anything that you would like to comment on?
So firstly, no, it genuinely is just me doing all the coding. It's a one-person project. It's amazing what you can do without suffering death by PowerPoint and thousands of meetings and bureaucracy. If you've got that combination of fundamentally understanding physics and fundamentally understanding what really great coding and coding architecture looks like, then you can just get on with it. And the speed of development speaks for itself. In terms of investment, I'm always open to kind of working with anyone who shares the same values that we've been talking about. And maybe somebody comes along, maybe they don't, and we carry on just as we are.
The same conspiracy theorists are planning the merger and acquisition of indieVelo and possibly the combination with other platforms to create a super platform so that nobody will have to look any further. It's obviously a possibility, right, George? You position yourself as a service provider. If you create the technology and you feel confident with it and somebody comes along that meets your vision for the future for cycling esports, I don't necessarily see a merger or an acquisition being a negative thing. It may be a tough hit for the community, but I think in the long run, it would probably be a positive. So I'd like to get your sense on how you feel about that, whether the future does hold that for indieVelo.
It's certainly possible. As you say, I've positioned indieVelo as you say, as a service provider, and that means that we're talking with everybody in the industry. So every platform that you can think of, I'm talking with them, and a whole bunch of companies who don't have platforms, and I'm talking with them as well. It's never been the intention to build some kind of multi-billion-dollar company out of indieVelo. I'm not chasing after millions of users to satisfy shareholders or anything like that. It's all about producing amazing world-class technology that benefits athletes. And those kind of incumbent first-generation platforms, the Zwifts and my Whooshes, don't have the time or expertise or focus to do that kind of investment in their engines to be able to produce that next generation for the athletes. And instead of me kind of complaining from the sidelines about that, I'm the kind of personality who goes off and builds it and works with others to supply it. It's the same analogy with the Tour de France or something. ASO organised the event, and they don't, huge company, but they don't have the time, expertise, and focus to go build a world-class timing system or build their own cars or whatever. They get them from Tissot or Skoda or whoever it is. And it's the same principle with indieVelo. My expertise is in technology, and I'm happy to kind of supply it to whoever wants to use it and make their product better. And maybe that's acquisition, maybe it's licensing. I'm genuinely open.
So, George, can I just pick up on that? So are you, it's going to sound rather blunt, but I apologise because I can't think of any better way of putting it right at this moment. So are you servicing your personal knowledge or the platform indieVelo?
Either, actually.
Okay.
So there are absolutely both ways of doing it. So being able to help other companies with development of their stuff, or being able to license bits of indieVelo, or being able to license the whole of indieVelo. It was designed from day one to be completely brandable. So you could just swap out all the graphics and replace them all. So you could replace all the routes, you could replace all the avatars, replace all the graphics, the world, really easily. And that's also part of the reason why, going back to our earlier conversation, I haven't really invested in the graphics side, because in some sort of licensing model future where the indieVelo engine gets rebranded and repackaged as some other platforms, white labeling essentially.
Yeah.
Then all that graphics work will get thrown away. So it's not something that's at the core of my business. And so, I'm genuinely open to working with anyone who shares those kind of values that we've been talking about.
You're speaking about that on the My Wish Facebook pages. The race director, Matt Smithson, mentioned, I'll just read what he wrote. I speak with the owner of indieVelo regularly to see how we can all improve our platforms and support esports in the community. So obviously you've been speaking. Can you tell us anything about how a possible collaboration could work there, or what the conversations have been like?
Yeah, as I say, I'm speaking with everyone in the industry, whether that's Zwift or Whoosh or Roller or Virtual Pro, or speak to Peloton, or speak to all sorts of companies across the entire spectrum. So there are all sorts of possibilities of how this could pan out. Obviously, all of that's under NDA, and I'm not going to reveal all that to you. Sorry. But
I had to try.
I love it when an NDA gets in the way.
But yeah, as I said, I've positioned indieVelo very much as a service provider. I am one person. I'm not a billion-dollar company with thousands of employees. So it's never going to be the case that indieVelo is a company that is chasing after millions and millions of subscribers in the same way that Zwift and Whoosh and Peloton are. And it's always been the intention to be able to build great technology that benefits everyone.
Can you be everything and everybody and still be a platform? A lot of people see that there's not necessarily a service provider element there's a competitor element. You have creating a competitive platform. Is there a conflict there? Can you provide services to Zwift and also create a platform that could conceivably be in competition with Zwift or MyWish or Roller or what have you? How can you make that distinction for the people that might be listening that really can't see the clear line there?
Well, the kind of evidence speaks for itself. It's well known that we've got a contract with Zwift and do the performance verification for them for the recent Zwift games. We are already in the position that we're working with these other major platforms. As that, indieVelo hasn't spent a single dollar on advertising, marketing, PR, or anything like that. Its growth has been purely by word of mouth recommendation between riders, where one rider would get on, think, "Yeah, this is great," and tell their mates, and more have come along. But yeah, I just don't see indieVelo as being the kind of company that is going to, sponsor the Tour de France or something to try and bring in lots of people, because that's just not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is creating awesome technology.
Talking about creating awesome technology, George, you are still in beta mode. What plans or what time frame are you envisaging of coming out of that? Or is this a community-based project that will probably always be in that mode because of the nature of what it is?
That's a really good question, and I honestly don't know what the answer is to it. It depends on what the community wants, actually, and the roadmap is 100% determined by what people suggest. I don't presume to know what all the answers are, and because indieVelo doesn't have any external shareholders or investors, there's no one to dictate what must be done in the name of increasing shareholder value. It's if the athletes want it, I'll go build it. And people are more than happy to pop onto the indieVelo Discord or Facebook group and share their thoughts and have that opportunity to shape the future of virtual sport. At some point, then we'll come out of beta. But equally, if the kind of the service provider thing really takes off, is there any need to come out of that? If if the platform is able to function it's still in a closed beta mode and provide awesome racing technology on other platforms, well, that's a good outcome too.
Can you give the indieVelo community a little insight into what's down the road? Maybe a month, 2 months. What are some of the big goals that you have set up for the platform? Some of the big features, some big things that are going to make a splash, like the Apple TV has, and the draft mechanics changes have in the short term.
As I said, it totally depends on what people want to see. Make suggestions. I literally each week I come along, I have a look, see what people are suggesting, and then go build that. It's really exciting to be able to see what happens. The point here is to define the future of virtual sport, and I'm not so arrogant to dictate to other people what that should be. I want to listen to the riders. I want to act on their wants, their needs, understand what the community is really looking for, and then build it. Now, I don't know what the future will be, but I do know that it's going to be fantastic fun building it.
It's a very organic nature of development, isn't it? Which is very, very different from other areas of business that we would see. So, we can feel your excitement through the screen, George. I did have one last question, and I sort of want to take us back to almost where we were at the beginning, really, but just really focus on that future. Very recently, the Esports World Championship 2024 racebook was released. The national federations are focusing and starting to get their acts together in terms of selection and selection criteria for the World Championships this year. You spoke really at the beginning about imagining if online cycling were an Olympic sport. I suppose my sort of thoughts are, it's quite a new discipline. It's a very fast growing discipline in terms of participation and also number of racers and racers becoming professional esports cyclists, which I think is really, really exciting to have that opportunity to really groundswell and move the sport forward. I suppose I've sort of got a 2-point question. One, are we moving as a sport too quickly for the governing bodies to keep up? Or can we really get online cycling to be an Olympic sport within, I was going to say, maybe the next 10 to 15 years?
So, excellent question. I think 10 to 15 years is a very long time, and I would expect things to move much, much faster than that. As you say, there's evidently lots of change, and the UCI are working out what their position is too. For me, at the heart of it, it's about credibility. How do we make the sport credible? And if you look at it from the IOC's point of view, the IOC won't want a Zwifting gold medal at the Olympics. They won't want a whooshing gold medal, or whatever the right word is. They want an online cycling medal. You've been around the Olympics. You've seen the branding police coming around with their black gaffer tape.
The tape's the wrong way around.
Exactly. The IOC are incredibly protective of their brand, and they're not going to, as I say, they're not going to want a Zwifting or a whooshing gold medal. They'll want a generic, online cycling medal. And we need to collectively figure out how we can pitch that to the IOC. How do we get these big billion-dollar companies to sit down at the same table and work together? And until they want to play ball with each other, then things probably won't change at that level. You look at something like any established sport, but let's pick road racing or track cycling or something, where you have qualification leading up to the Olympics, where you might compete over 12 months in lots of different countries, lots of different events, and then you qualify through to a final. And it's going to be the same thing in online cycling. You're going to do one event on Whoosh and one event on Zwift and one event on Roller or whatever it is. And that's the only viable model for a online cycling event as opposed to a Zwift event or a Whoosh event. And so we need to figure out how we get that. How do we get these big companies to work together? And in the meantime, for indieVelo's part, it's about keeping on innovating and improving driving that kind of better and more engaging riding, the better broadcast technology, the better auditing and commissariability of online cycling. We know what that first generation of platforms looked like, and that they were brilliant. Question is, what will the second generation of platform looks like? And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking, trying to pull those three key elements out of what you just said. It would be fantastic, wouldn't it? My 10 to 15 year was in my head probably a realistic one, but probably if we can move faster, it would be so much more exciting for those riders and racers racing now to think it is within the possibility of their career goals, not just the young riders who are witnessing them and seeing the fact that they can make a living at it and that's what they want to do. So I've written down credibility, number one, and ensuring credibility. 2, I've got communication and coordination across platforms is essential. What would you put for 3, George?
It comes back to what we were talking about right at the start. It's tactically interesting racing. It needs to be engaging for audiences. It can't be everybody just trundles along for half an hour and whoever's got the biggest sprint at the end wins. You look at real life cycling, and with the best will in the world, the sprint stages where the peloton rambles on for 4 hours and then there's 2 minutes of excitement at the end aren't the most compelling things in the world. The things that people watch are the mountain stages where it splits up and there's bodies all over the mountain. That's the exciting part. And we need to figure out, how do we get online racing to replicate, not necessarily identically to that, but replicate the feeling of it, that sense of uncertainty, the sense of the rider's decisions really making a difference as to the outcome of the event. That's going to be an absolutely crucial part of the of how this pans out.
Honored to have you on 3 times, and I'm a huge supporter of your vision. And I just want to let the people know that are listening here. I'm watching these two, and I get the sense that they've met each other before. I don't know. They both kind of travel in the same circles in the UK. Is it possible that you've met in person?
Maybe once or twice.
Exactly.
By the side of a road race, maybe at a finish line once or twice.
Exactly. I'm sure I will have commissared some of the races that you've been in, but not to chat, and it's been lovely.
Yeah, it's been really nice to see you, George. Not in an official uniform.
Exactly.
Yeah. But thank you ever so much, George. It really has been an absolute pleasure to chat and to listen to what you've got to say.
Yes, it's been lovely to talk to you as well. Thank you.
Thanks again, George. It's always great. I appreciate it. Honored to share your vision.
Well, Chris, that was a really interesting interview with George Gilbert, really focusing very much, I think, on that committed athlete group. I was really surprised to think about that. He really, really strong focus from him on that group being the target group for indieVelo. Particularly, in terms of the current field of people looking at different platforms and choosing multi-platforms as well as individual platforms to ride from. So really interesting to hear his view on who indieVelo is really targeted at.
Yeah, I think it's amazing the inroads that he's made in such a short period of time. Like I mentioned that he was on the podcast a year ago. That was when I came across the great community and all the great work that he's been doing. And I put my support behind it 100% because I was really very impressed by what he was doing. In that period of time, he's basically developed indieVelo into one of the big 3, right? Whenever I go to interview somebody or a source, they only mention 3 different virtual cycling platforms now. They mention Zwift, they mention MyWhoosh, and they mention indieVelo. The fact that he's one person doing all these things and he's basically trying to cater to the frustrated racer, the crowd that's an ideal that's been underserved at the other platforms, and they want to go to a place where they don't have to worry about, let's just face it, people that are cheating, right? That's the easiest way to put it, right? And there are unrealistic performances that are going on a daily basis in some of the races, and they get frustrated by that. And there's people that want to have credible racing and that take cycling esports really seriously, whether they're elite athletes or they're amateur athletes or people that just put a lot of time and effort into their training, and they want to be able to enjoy that on a level playing field.
Well, I think that organic nature of the development of indieVelo that George was really highlighting has got to be attractive to some of those really committed racers. The fact that they can really influence the type and nature of development of indieVelo itself and the route that it takes.
People always speak about Zwift and the community there. I'm somewhat immersed in the community of indieVelo, and as I try to be with my wish and all the others, and I'm always amazed at the innovation and the purpose-driven thoughtfulness that racers have about this platform that they're so passionate about. And it truly is a community over there, and they're actually working collaboratively to bring it. The majority of the features, if not all of them, have been things that the community has offered up to George, and he's acted on.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing that I really take from that conversation with George was almost that final section we were talking about there about the future, not just of indieVelo, but the future of esports, and how and what esports as a sport and a community need to do if it really does want to become an Olympic sport in its own right. And that focus of George is in terms of that overall picture, and the fact that he's got that sort of commissary and governance background, as well as obviously the ability to create a platform and do that level of coding, I think is a really interesting point for discussion.
I agree with you. And I almost feel that it's kind of one of these catch-22 no-win situations for somebody like Dr. Gilbert, right, who has to create a platform to provide a place for a proof of concept. But in doing that, providing a platform where you have to test that technology, you're also creating a competitor for the other platforms that you're going to be serving. It's a no-win situation. And when he says that you have to look at the intent, until he proves that he's creating a conflict, then the intent is to be a service provider and try to create the technology to move the sport forward.
Yeah, and that moving the sport forward may well be about that communication and coordination. And how do we go about putting a World Cup series into online cycling, which I think would be really exciting.
Oh, so do I. I'm railing on that concept forever. And when I had the opportunity to interview Michael Rogers, that was certainly one of the things that I asked him. And he was really enthusiastic about it, although he did say, and it's come up on this podcast numerous times, that in order to do that, the major players had to sit at the table together and play nice. And that seems like something that's far off at the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, not very far off at the moment is the Esports World Championships this year. That 2024 race book has come out from the UCI now, and that's got a very clear set of dates and deadlines within it that I'm sure there are a large number of athletes around the globe looking at very, very closely and heading over to their federations' websites for selection criteria so that they can plan their summers in terms of racing, training, and making sure that they hit those deadlines and that shortlist for the semi-finals at the beginning of September. I know, Chris, I've had a little look at some of the federations' websites to look and see whether those selection criteria are there yet. I did hit lucky today when I looked at New Zealand's because there it was. Everywhere else I've looked so far, they are obviously working fast and furious behind the scenes to get that selection criteria out. I think if I was an athlete wanting to be at those World Championships, I'd be so excited, but so wanting that information right now. You
had mentioned earlier that perhaps cycling esports is moving too fast for the federations. I'm not so sure. I think that maybe the fact that cycling esports is not necessarily a priority for the federations makes it seems like it's moving too fast. But there are some deadlines that are looming as far as the race book is concerned, and dictates by the 30th of June, the federations have to choose whether they're going to utilize their full allotment and make intentions known as far as that's concerned. And we've heard from my wish this week that the actual cycling esports courses will be available in the next release, which they anticipate is going to be in the beginning of June. So pretty soon you and I will be able to ride the courses that the races will be racing. And that does give the opportunity for test events and for the federations to set up qualifications on those courses and move forward. But yeah, it's quite an unfulfilling search when you go onto all the different federations' websites and you don't find anything as far as updated criteria or selections or any kind of plans. And thankfully, New Zealand has taken the initiative here. But I did speak to the head of the sports committee at the Danish Cycling Union. He's going to come on and talk to us, but he didn't want to until he had all this plans in place. So they are actively working on that. And I've documented what they've done because they've been extremely successful. And I think that there's a reason why, is because they've got a lot of resources behind it in Denmark. But there are also things that are going on the platform that's going to be hosting the World Championships as well. Yeah, there are indeed. And
I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation with the Danish Federation, given that the men's champion at the moment wearing those rainbow stripes is, of course, Danish.
Absolutely.
So, it is interesting, isn't it? Those MyWish draft mechanics. I think you've been putting a little something out in the press recently, haven't you?
Well, like I mentioned to George, the Apple TV was a big thing. It was a big thing for MyWish as well. It basically drops a huge barrier for accessibility for the platforms, and they've also created a companion app as well. But their sticking point there is the draft mechanic. When's the draft mechanics going to get addressed? And they've always said publicly, there's nothing wrong with our draft mechanics. The only thing that's wrong is that you're used to draft mechanics at this platform, or you're used to draft mechanics at this platform. If you come over here and learn ours, then everything will be fine. You just got to come over here and learn ours. That didn't really sit well with a lot of the elite athletes that I spoke to, because they're like, the draft mechanics are not good. You're not going to tell me that they are, because this is what I do. And I'm not going to go over there and learn them, because I'm going to have to unlearn them before the biggest event of my life. So I was able to sit down with MyWish's draft consultant, who was a great guy. I actually spoke to him in person when I was in Abu Dhabi. Australian gent, really nice, been a cyclist all his life. And you could tell when we got together that he certainly knew his way around the bike. His name is Rodney Loxley, really super guy, extremely intelligent also. We had a lot of conversations, and they're going to be addressing the draft mechanic.
Well, there you go. You've heard it here from Chris. And you can read it, can't you? Obviously, in that interview with Rodney Loxley. So if you are interested in hearing more, you can subscribe to the Virtual Velo Podcast, or you can follow or like Indeed the Zomanique on social media for all the updates. Thanks for joining us for episode 42. Until next time, enjoy your riding. We'll see you again soon for another Virtual Velo Podcast.